In this video, I will take you through the 8 stages of how I remember what I read. Hello learners! On this channel, I help people instill quality reading habits into their lives, give book summaries, and talk about building a second brain. If you read a lot like me, you know one of the hardest things to do is remember what you read. You read book after book, but after only a month, can barely remember a few facts. A couple of years ago, I decided to do something about this and started trying to actively remember what I read. In this video, I will take you down the 8 stages I went through to get to where I am today. I've modified the 8 stages after social classes in the fantasy series by Brandon Sanderson, The Stormlight Archives, mostly because it's super cool and awesome, and you should check it out if you're looking for a large chonker of a series rivaling The Lord of the Rings. Simple Darkeye. In the first stage, I was a mere simple Darkeye. I started at this level in January of 2021. As a Darkeye, I read like most people do. I didn't take notes apart from an occasional highlight. I didn't create action items after reading books. I did basically nothing. The issue is this is a passive form of learning. Passive learning doesn't take much effort and isn't effective at fostering memory or implementation. Some examples of passive learning are rereading notes, skimming textbooks, or pleasure reading. This is fine if you're reading for pleasure, and there's undoubtedly a case for not implementing or retaining everything you read, all of which I talk about in my video up here. But at some point, I got sick of my dark-eyed existence and moved on to the second level of reading by enlisting into the Alethkar army and becoming a soldier in January of 2021. Soldier. As a soldier, I started highlighting and taking annotations while reading. To bring clarity to the process, I began using the SQ3R reading framework to help me. The framework is super simple. Survey. First, you survey the text by glancing over the headings in a chapter to see the few significant points that will develop. Also, read the intro and final summary if a chapter has one. Question. Then, turn the first heading into a question you want to answer through your reading. Read. Next, start actively reading to answer the question. Recite. After reading a chapter or a section, look away from the book and try to recite the answer in your own words. Review. Finally, after you finish reading, review your notes to get a bird's eye view of the points and the relationships by reciting the major subpoints of each heading without looking at the book. You can even use this technique with fiction by asking yourself throughout a chapter what the author is trying to say and what symbols, patterns, or character developments you notice. Then, at the end of the chapter, you can summarize in your head what happened. The framework is simple, but not easy. It turned my passive reading session into an active one by forcing me to be more intentional with how I read. I no longer can just scan a text. Plus, the SQ3R reading framework gives me ideas for what to put in my annotations. If you want to learn more about how I highlight and annotate while reading, check out my video on the subject up above. What if I'm listening to an Audible book or a podcast? I like to pause every 5 to 15 minutes and recite the points that resonated with me most. Then, after I finish listening, I'll jot down 3 to 5 big takeaways or action items inside of a notes document. This was me from January of 2021 until March of 2021, when I reached stage 3 of my reading journey by becoming an aspiring Lighteye. As an aspiring Lighteye, I started conversing with others about my reading. Conversing is one of the best ways to remember what you read because it forces you to distill ideas from your books outside your reading sessions. My favorite method of conversing is through a teaching strategy called the Feynman technique. The Feynman technique is a technique developed by phenomenal physicist lecturer Richard Feynman. He believed you only truly know something if you can explain it to a 5-year-old. Using the Feynman technique, I started talking about ideas from books that resonated with me in the most distilled form possible. If the other person thinks I'm speaking bananas, I know I don't understand the concept or remember the book well enough. This doesn't have to be only with friends or family. Aspiring Lighteyes can join a book club in their area or online through Discord, Goodreads, or some other platform. You could even create your own. For example, I'm starting a book club at Cornell University next semester because there isn't one for undergraduate students. You should join if you're going. From March 2021, I remained an aspiring Lighteye until in June of 2021, I reached stage 4 of my reading journey by getting full light-eyed status. As a Lighteye, I started to read books differently depending on the type of book. By the stage, I had read so many books, I realized I should read some books differently than others. Different books have different types of information I wanted to remember. I started to divide books into 3 major types: personal development, informational/instructional, and fiction/sci-fi/fantasy/manga. When reading personal development books, I asked myself what I can take away from the book and apply to my own life. Because of this, my highlights and annotations are much more personally applicable. When reading informational/instructional books, however, I'm looking for key pieces of information I can make actionable or include in a future project like an article. Finally, for fiction/sci-fi/fantasy/manga books, I generally read more for enjoyment and as a break from other things in life. In addition to reading differently based on information, Lighteyes read in 4 different levels, as discussed in How to Read by Mortimer J. Adler, which I have an entire book summary on in my Book Squad playlist. The first level is elementary reading, the reading most of us learn in elementary school. In mastering this level, one goes from non-literary to beginning literacy. You learn to acquire initial reading skills, learn the rudiments of reading, and figure out what a passage says. I generally use this level for more accessible fiction/sci-fi/fantasy/manga books I don't want to put in much effort for. Adler explains that the first level of inspectional reading is systematic skimming or pre-reading. At this level, the main goal is to learn if the book is worth a more in-depth read. You do this by reading book summaries and scanning chapter headings, subheadings, introductions, and conclusions. The second level of inspectional reading is superficial reading, the art of reading at different speeds based on the text. Sometimes, while reading, you'll want to skip over vast amounts of text or skim for the general gist. Other times, if you're reading a dense science book like Thinking Fast and Slow or The Selfish Gene, you'll want to slow down and soak in everything you're reading. The third level of reading is analytical reading. This involves analyzing a book by asking and answering 4 main questions while you read. What is the book about as a whole? What does it say in detail and how? Is the book true in whole or in part? And what is the meaning of life? I'm kidding. The last question is, why does the book matter? Adler explains that the last and most challenging reading level is synoptical reading. Reading a series of books on one topic or idea and analyzing where they differ to reach a more informed conclusion. Many authors have contrasting or conflicting views of things. Therefore, reading only one book on a topic can lead to biased and one-sided thoughts. We'll discuss more of this reading level in the last stage of my reading journey. Being a Lighteye was cool, but I noticed over time that nothing made me go back through my highlights and annotations from books I read. So in June of 2021, I progressed to the next reading stage by rising in the Lighteye ranks and becoming a Battalionlord. As a Battalionlord, I created a systematic system for collecting and reading my highlights and annotations using Readwise. Readwise is a sick app that collects highlights and notes from the various books, podcasts, articles, or other things you consume. Then it sends a random 5 to 15 to you every day through an email. Even cooler, Readwise lets you create flashcards out of these highlights, allowing you to apply spaced repetition and active recall techniques to your reading. For the first few months after downloading Readwise, I was religious about reading the daily highlight email. But as the months went by, I started looking over them less and less. I realized the daily highlight email was a bit passive for my liking. And in March of 2021, I moved on to stage 6. Where did I get? Stage 6 of the reading journey by getting a shard blade and becoming a Shardbearer. As a Shardbearer, I started to export my Readwise highlights into Roam Research, my note-taking system. Then, I began to create book summaries out of these highlights. Writing book summaries forced me to synthesize my ideas into a coherent and logical flow. I won't lie, it takes a lot of time and effort, but I noticed every book I wrote a book summary for, I remembered way better months or years down the line. Luckily, you don't have to write a super chunky book summary for every book. You can do more or less depending on how much much the book resonates with you. For most books I read entirely, I make a summary by answering a set of template questions in a Notion document I've linked in the description. The template makes me write the book's main ideas in 3 sentences, my impressions, who else I think should read it, how the book has changed me, and my top 3 quotes. For the books I find particularly life-changing, I go through the extra effort of creating a long-form book summary. These are longer summaries, around 3 to 15 pages, that contain more of my thoughts, reflections, and references to other books I've read. I detail my entire process for creating long-form book summaries in the article I have linked below. Some books I've done this for in the past are Actionable Gamification, Anti-Fragile, Sapiens, Subtract, The Untapped Science of Less, and The Art of Reading, which you can check out under the book summaries tag on my website and in my video book squad series on the channel linked up above. Creating book summaries changed my life in 2 major ways. First, it creates intermediate packets, past work, which forms the building blocks of future projects. This leads to a beautiful compounding effect. My past writings make new projects easier, creating more writing and adding to my total number of intermediate packets for future projects. As a result, I start some projects at 80% completion without even realizing it. Second, book summaries let me benefit from intellectual phase transitions. This is the uniqueness your book summary shows compared to the original book because you came at the book with a unique set of experiences, education, place of residence, relationships, and genetics compared to the author and other readers. Being a Shardbearer was a big step up, but in August of 2021, I moved to stage 7 of the reading journey by getting a land and an army and becoming a Highprince. As a Highprince, I started to create content for my book notes and book summaries more intentionally. I make YouTube videos, blog posts, courses, and email newsletters. Creating content benefits me in 3 major ways. Like the Feynman technique, content creation forces me to distill what I have learned into its fundamental parts. This helps me understand it on a deeper level myself, and hopefully in the process, I help others. But even cooler, content creation allows me to create a serendipity vehicle. A serendipity vehicle is a magnet of ideas, people, and opportunities you didn't even know existed that begins when you start distilling and repackaging ideas into digestible and insightful forms on the internet. Creating content has led me to meet tons of awesome people like my YouTube accountability group I formed after joining cohort 4 of the Part-Time YouTuber Academy. I even got to meet some of them physically during a physical meetup in London on the 13th of May, 2022. I've started to get people in real life and online telling me my content has changed their lives. It's an otherworldly feeling. Finally, creating content makes it possible for your reading habit to make you money. The internet is starving for good content. We live in a paradox of abundance. The amount of terrible information is getting higher, while the quality of good information is improving. If you can find a way to distill your readings in a way that is interesting to others, you can make a passive income stream online. Many influencers I know built the foundation of their internet persona off of creating book summaries and putting it on their blog. Go on Nat Eliason's, Ali Abdal's, Thomas Frank's, and James Clear's websites, and you'll see each of them has a page for book summaries. I remained a Shardbearer until in May of 2022, I finally entered the last reading stage by becoming a full Knights Radiant. As a Knights Radiant, I started to undergo deep learning projects on topics I was interested in. Deep learning projects, similar to the synoptical level of reading mentioned earlier, are in-depth explorations into new topics I want to learn more about. They comprise a series of books written by different authors to give varying perspectives. Deep learning projects take more time and effort than anything else we have discussed. But every time I have done one, I have come out with a vastly greater memory and understanding of what I read. Some of the past deep learning projects I have done were on personal knowledge management, gamification, fasting, and nutrition science. Looking at my reading journey as a whole can seem daunting, but look at how long the journey took me. Over a year of hard work. You won't progress to a Knights Radiant in one fell swoop. You don't have to get to stage 8 at all. If you can get to stage 6 and create short-term book summaries from what you read using my Notion template, you're doing better than 99.9% of people. Stage 6 isn't that hard. You're essentially doing what you've been doing since primary school, writing down your main thoughts on a book after reading it. If there's one regret I have from my high school years, it's that I didn't start going through this reading journey earlier. I've barely been doing it for more than a year, and my life has changed drastically. In 10 or 20 years' time, I can't imagine the treasure trove of knowledge I will have. There's another thing I wish I had started doing in high school as well: building a second brain. This is the act of capturing knowledge and fostering it over time for creative acts. It's the workflow I use to remember, implement, and create content from what I read. If you don't know what building a second brain is and want to learn more, check out my beginner's guide to building a second brain up above. If you know what it is or are up for a challenge, check out my in-depth workflow playlist where I go through the nitty-gritty of my systems for doing things in my life. Many involve how I take notes and create content from the books I read. As always, have a fantastic rest of your day, and bye-bye.